So are we calling her Gerardi now or Gerardi? That last one sounds Swedish. Hello interwebs, and sadly, or gladly depending on how you've been thinking about this entire season of Star Trek Picard, we have finally reached the Season 2 finale of Star Trek Picard, titled Farwell. But with that out of the way, before we get into the specifics of this episode, I think it's worthwhile, since we've reached the end of the season, to take a moment to talk about the season as a whole. It is probably being kind to say that this season has been more than a little controversial. Now, there are the people that have hated every episode and every season and every storyline of this modern era of Star Trek, going back to Star Trek Discovery Season 1, or even arguably back to Star Trek 2009. And to be fair, those people do have valid criticisms, and I'm not dismissing them. They have tons of reasons, whether they don't like the style, the storytelling, they don't like the writing, all that stuff. I understand where most of them come from. There are people that I take issue with in some ways, shapes, or form, but for the most part, I can understand if I don't agree with their point of view. But that being said, though, there have been people who have generally liked this modern era of Star Trek, people who even I consider friends or whose opinions I deeply respect and things like that, who have really disliked or even outwardly despised this season of Star Trek Picard. And on many levels, I can totally understand why. I myself have generally been positive on this season, especially in the front half of the season. But as the second half of the season has gone on, and the trust that I placed in the first half of the season to take me on a road and storytelling journey through its 10-episode arc in a way that felt satisfying and worthwhile has not been completely followed through on. There have been strange character decisions, pacing problems, plot choices that seem to fly in the face of the actual stakes and threat that have been placed before them, like Seven and Raffi being able to run across a field of Borg-infested people without getting any harm done to them, or butterflies out the butt throughout this entire season that the characters don't seem to care about, like ICE detainees just getting off the bus that presumably would have been taken to the border and deported if they hadn't been taken off. All that sort of stuff has been kind of frustrating to watch. And for a lot of people that are focused on that, and totally rightfully so, because they are deeply frustrating problems that I understand throwing anyone off from this season and making them abjectly hate it and consider this to be one of the worst seasons of Star Trek ever, I totally can understand that view. I'm not dismissing it in any way, shape, or form. Like, those things are here, they are present, and they continue. And there are some things in this finale that, oh boy, we will get into that just made me, like, have my eyes roll back in my head. We'll talk about it in a moment. But that being said, I have been able to find some appreciation this season in some of the thematics and story threads and honestly truly beautiful moments that this season has been able to deliver. Has it been greater than the sum of its parts? Has it come into a cohesive whole that has felt as satisfying as I had hoped it would be at the first half of the season? No, not really. And you do really feel that in this finale. But that being said, there were a few moments, a few glimmers, a few pearls within this finale that really hit me where I felt them, and I felt were a fitting enough end to certain storylines that not only have played out through this season, but throughout all of Next Generation and Star Trek in general, that I appreciated and really deeply enjoyed. In a lot of ways, while I have different issues with both seasons, this finale reminds me a lot of Star Trek Picard Season 1's finale. I've made no bones about the fact that I have a lot of frustrations with Star Trek Picard Season 1, and I have a lot of problems with its finale. But the moment with Data passing on and his final few moments with Picard were, I think, some of the most beautiful moments in any Star Trek, regardless of the context and storyline that fit around it. Now, that was one singular moment in a finale, and in this finale, I think there are actually several of those moments that, in some ways, weren't set up, weren't given the proper context, not given the proper build-up that they deserved, and in many ways, they feel a little bit isolated in sort of their emotional context that is a little bit frustrating to sit with them in. But in and of themselves, I think they are very sweet scenes. And finally, too, I do think that the emotional journey that the season has taken Picard through, the thematic concept of him coming to terms with accepting his losses, accepting his trauma, and understanding that they are a part of himself, not something to be shunned away or ignored, but also not something to say, they made me better, they made me this better person for having experienced trauma, but just coming to accept them as who you are. That concept that has been brought through with Picard and also reflected in characters like Raffi and Seven and Rios, I honestly do think are paid off rather beautifully here. There are some really sweet moments that just gut punch me. But I think for me, outside of one cameo, which I did really love in this episode that I won't spoil because I won't go into spoilers yet, the scenes between Picard and John Delancey I thought were something truly special, akin to those scenes with Data that we saw in the season 1 finale. Just really beautiful scenes that pay off probably more off of what we saw with these characters in The Next Generation than within the context of Star Trek Picard, but still feel strong and truthful nonetheless, and also do tie nicely into the themes of the season. So I think to wrap up my spoiler-free section, I've kind of waxed poetically within it. This season finale is deeply frustrating. There are plot lines and ways that things wrap up that are entirely too easy. They are entirely without tension and are honestly kind of frustrating. And when I go back and re-binge this season in order to do my season-long overview, they're probably going to exacerbate some of the earlier things in this season that I really, really enjoyed the first time through, but will probably no longer enjoy my second time through. But that being said, I will take solace that there are those beautiful moments within this finale, that there are those nice little payoffs for characters that we will probably never get a chance to see again, at least in this iteration and form of them. And I think that that kind of nicely ties into what this season was about as a whole. Accepting your losses, accepting imperfection, accepting that something didn't go necessarily the way that you wished, but being able to take solace in what it actually is and what you were given. So, did I love this episode? Did I love this season? No, not really. But I still found things that I did like about it. So, to talk about that, we're going to have to get into spoilers. Okay, now that we're in spoilers and now that I'm done waxing poetically about the season as a whole, let's talk about specifics, as oh boy, do I have some things that I really loved and things that I really hated. Oh, we're going to talk about it. So the opening setup, I actually really enjoyed that the bullet holes that the Borg stormtrooper people made in the chateau are actually the bullet holes that Picard remembered from his youth, because that can get all like weirdly timey-wimey. It's like, oh, is this always supposed to happen, or is Picard actually only remembering it because it happened now and it's sort of re-engaging his brain and they weren't always there originally? Like, just that whole idea of the timey-wimey wibbly-wobbly of it all, I thought was just a cool little concept to play with, and Picard being like, I don't know what it means, man. But then Talon, Picard, and the gang go back to Talon's lair, and they sort of make a plan to split up and try to stop Soon from stopping Renee getting into space, now that we have an actual tangible goal. Talon goes after Renee, and Picard sort of follows after because he knows what her plan is, and Seven, Raffi, and Rios go to Soon's mansion in order to stop him from possibly blowing up the ship. Now I'm going to start with Seven, Soon, and Raffi because I don't really have much to say about it. They go there, they find some drones, and I at least liked the fact that Soon accounted for them being able to find it, because when they initially got there and they find out that they had discovered Soon's backup plan, I was like, really? Soon led them there knowing that they would find his drones? And then I at least liked that they accounted for that, saying like, oh, he rigged it all to blow. So I think Soon probably would have been smarter to send them somewhere else than the place where his literal backup plan was. But that being said, I at least like that they at least tried to put a lampshade on it a little bit, but still a little bit frustrating there. And then the rest of it was like Raffi techie tech, Seven yells, and Rios saves the day by blowing up the other drones. It was busy work for them to have something to do in the finale. Neither all that bad, neither all that good. But getting at the heart of matter, jumping over to Seven and Talon, I have mixed feelings on how that storyline went. Because on the whole, thematically, I did really like it. And this is going to be the term that you're going to hear a lot of the time here. That thematically I liked it, in execution, not so much. Because I did really like that Talon sort of stood up to Picard and said, my life isn't yours to control. You need to accept that other people are going to do things that you can't choose for them, and you can't choose who you lose. You just have to kind of accept it as part of yourself. And that, again, gets into like what Picard's been wrestling with his mother, and coming to terms with the fact that he feels guilt over his mother's death when he really shouldn't. And just because he had an element in that specific version of it, of how that played out, doesn't mean that it's on him, and he needs to accept that as part of himself. And I liked that that is what this got at. And I liked also Talon's final moments with Picard, where she finally got to meet Renee, she got to see this person who she's been thinking about her whole life, and actually got to have that small moment of catharsis, to getting to meet the person that she's thought so much about and fought for her entire life. It was honestly, I thought that that was a rather sweet moment for her, dying in her arms and saying look up as she watched the the shuttle go off using the same words that Picard's mom said to him. I thought that was really, really sweet. That being said, though, I get that Soon's the big billionaire bad guy here who's gonna get his way and could have gotten to Renee to kill her with his neurotoxin, and that they did need to stop him in some way, shape, or form, but I don't really understand why Talon needed to die to do that, other than Gerardi's words that were some sort of prophecy about the future. Why couldn't she have just pretended to be Renee, and instead of letting Soon shake her hand and fill her full of neurotoxin like GLaDOS, why not just shoot him with a phaser right there? Even if you were worried about, like, maybe causing a butterfly by killing Soon, why not just knock him out? Like, just stun him with a phaser. Problem solved. I don't understand why Talon had to die, other than it was a necessary thing that they wanted to get to for the emotional catharsis for Picard. It was just a kind of a deeply frustrating choice in execution. That, especially since they were prepared for him and were able to, like, be there before him, that they couldn't have thought of a better plan than Talon sacrificing himself in order to stop Soon. It was just a weird execution of that idea, and it was kind of frustrating. But then this brings us to Soon basically getting completely defeated, watching Renee getting off into space, his legacy disappearing, and then Kore logging in with her VR tech and deleting all of his files, and he's sort of like, oh no, everything I've worked for is gone, my legacy is incomplete. The fine enough end for the villain, but then this led me to one of the most frustrating moments of the entire finale for me, and that was when he opened up the drawer, and he had a folder marked Project Khan. Now, clearly this was alluding to Khan Noonien Singh and the eugenics wars. And in a lot of ways, this makes a ton of sense. The next Soon that we see within Star Trek is the one that appears in Star Trek Enterprise, who was obsessed with eugenics and augments. And it also makes sense that there would be people that would have led to the eugenics and the creation of Khan, leading to him being sent off in the Botany Bay, and him appearing to meet Kirk and Star Trek the original series, and then going on to the Wrath of Khan. It honestly makes sense that Soon would have had a part in the upcoming eugenics wars, because it looks like we're retconning the eugenics wars to take place in the next decade, as opposed to in, I think, like the 90s when it was originally supposed to, back with the original series. All that works for me. The frustration that I have is specifically with it being called Project Khan, because it reeks to me of just some producer just saying, like, well, we have to call it Khan because then people will know it's about Khan Noonien Singh. And I'm just sitting here like, why would they call it that? Was their plan to, like, institute a Khan, like person in place with you? It so clearly reeks of, like, Easter eggy producer nonsense. Like, it just reads to me like a producer thinking we wouldn't get it if they said something just like eugenics or eugenics plans on it. They needed it to be very clear that it was Khan. It was all leading to Khan. Oh my god. Just thinking of this right now, it, like, reeks to me of, like, that same cynical producer, executive producer, studio executive thinking of when in Star Trek Nemesis we saw a picture of young Picard, and in that picture he had a bald head, because we clearly needed the younger Picard picture to have a bald head, or else we wouldn't understand that it was Picard. It's like that sort of, like, executive level, like, dumb thinking that just really frustrated me. I would have been perfectly fine with this connection if it had just said, like, eugenics or something like that, alluding to the eugenics wars on the paper, but it being called Project Khan is just dumb to me. Sorry, I know it's a weird sticking point, but I just saw the, like, hand behind the curtains producer cynicism behind that choice, and it really frustrated me. But then this leads me to the next scene, which I actually did like, with a few caveats, of us actually getting a wonderful, beautiful cameo of Wil Wheaton himself playing kind of Wesley Crusher as the Traveler, and offering Kore a chance to become the Traveler. I really adored this scene. I thought Wil Wheaton's kind of enthusiasm, not the best actor in the world in this scene, I understand it, but I just thought his enthusiasm at being there was just so sweet and wonderful, and it was nice to sort of see him get a little rap out of his story. And while I don't really care all that much about Kore at all, it was a nice sort of resolution to her story as well. Like, all of this scene was very, very sweet, and again, it was just so lovely to see Wil Wheaton back in this show. I absolutely loved getting to see him in The Traveler again. My one sort of niggle with this, and I don't really hate it, but I don't love it either, is that we do learn that the Travelers are the ones behind the supervisors, going all the way back to Gary 7, and they're the ones sort of orchestrating things behind the scenes just to sort of nudge history in the right direction. That fits the Travelers, that fits the, like, kind of what we've seen of them in The Next Generation, that they sort of stay out of things, but do poke here and there. I mean, that's how Wesley Crusher himself became a Traveler, because the Traveler in that show kind of nudged things along to get Wesley to become a Traveler, because he recognized stuff stuff in him. But I do worry a little bit about small universe syndrome. One of the things that I love about Star Trek in a lot of ways is there's all these like random plot threads and aliens. They don't necessarily get resolved. There's just a lot of nonsense lore going back to the original series and stuff. And I think like connecting them together sometimes like this kind of makes the universe feel a little bit smaller than it actually is. But that being said, Star Trek's a huge universe. There's tons of stuff still to draw from and connect to. So connecting these two things, I think it does small universe syndrome them a little bit, but it's not the worst thing in the world. So it's just kind of one thing that I was thinking about as we were watching it. But overall, I did really love this sweet scene with Will Wheaton. But then this leads me to probably what was my favorite scene of the entire season. We're back at the chateau, and we get sort of like the wrappy up stuff of Seven, Raffi, and Rios all saying like, oh, we've wrapped up all the butterflies that we can. There's not much more we can do. We're going to stay here in the present because we don't have the queen to go back to the future. All that made sense to me. The one thing that will bother me until my dying day, though, is they apparently did not give a crap about the, like, Borg people that Gerardi assimilated. Like, they were butterflies too. Like, I get that they had to kill them because of the situation. Understand that. But no one seems to care, like, oh, they might have been important too. Like, their deaths are butterflies, and also they were human beings before they got assimilated by the Borg, but we're just not gonna care about them because they were cannon fodder and whatever. Picard doesn't even mention it when he talks to Q. Is like, oh, Elnor died, and also Talon died, and all this other stuff. Fuck the Borg people, I guess. Red is really weird, especially after season 1's made painstakingly clear that people assimilated by the Borg were victims. And I'm like, oh, okay, I guess we're just gonna not care about them. Big butterfly, in my opinion. But regardless, we do get a truly lovely scene between Picard and Q. Everything in this scene I thought was absolutely wonderful. I loved that we learned that this entire thing was set in motion as a gift from Q to Picard. That he did this because he wanted Picard to come to terms with understanding himself and accepting the totality of himself and all of his trauma. Not necessarily saying it was worthwhile, but not dismissing it either, just accepting who he was and finding love for others. And that Q did it just because he cared about Picard. It wasn't some galactic thing. It wasn't some end of the universe stakes. It was just him doing it because he cared about a friend and he wanted to give a friend a gift. It is a little bit fucked up that it came at the expense of Elnor and those Borg people that were assimilated and killed last episode, but that does kind of fit Q, doesn't it, in his own weird, messed up way. I mean, going all the way back to Q says if you can't take a bloody nose, then you shouldn't be out in the galaxy. And the bloody nose referring to literal members of the Enterprise crew that died in the first encounter with the Borg that Q put them in the path of. So, dark for Q, but it does kind of fit him. But I also did really like Q saying that he's dying alone and he didn't want that for his friend. It does lead me to wonder where Lady Q and Q's own son are when he's dying, so question mark there. But again, I could see Q having ostracized himself from both of them, so kind of makes sense a little bit. But I like that he just had a favorite in Picard and wanted to give him a gift before he died. It made sense to me and I thought it was really sweet, and I thought the idea of accepting yourself was wonderful. And I also like that this was on the back of Picard putting the key back in its place. And I also like the acknowledgement that, like, the key being put there wasn't like Picard making the circle always having happened because he did this thing. It wasn't like a recursive loop that he was putting it there. It was more just about Picard symbolically coming to terms with the fact that this trauma was part of him, that he couldn't change it, and he shouldn't change it. It just was a part of his life and who he was. I liked that it was sort of a symbolic coming to terms of that. But then this brings us to the scene where Q brings all of our characters back to the future. Rio stays in the past. We had called that for forever, kind of knew that that was coming. And this also leads Q to have enough power to bring Elnor back. All of that's great. And that may be the last time we ever see John Delancey, though I will place a bet with you that the final scene of Season 3 of Picard will end with Picard dying because it's the last season of Star Trek Picard ever, and as Picard walks off into light, he'll be greeted by his friend Q, who will walk with him. That's my guess, that we will get John Delancey one more time in the Season 3 finale, but we'll see if that actually pays off. Anyways, we are brought right back to the events on the Stargazer from Episode 1 of this season, and everything that we kind of expected to play out, played out. Gerardi turns out to be the Borg Queen, Seven even gets a field commission, so she's officially in Starfleet now, which was kind of nice to see, and Elnor is still alive, as we later learn. Also, I should say that Gerardi in, like, the Borg Queen outfit was kind of badass. I'm like, damn, girl looks kind of weird, but I'm here for like the badass Black Borg Queen look. It does lead to the fact though that it is frustrating that she was hiding her face simply so that the audience in episode 1 wouldn't know that it was Gerardi. Like the only reason she was wearing that mask is so we wouldn't figure it out, not because it made sense for the character, because it would have actually made more sense for Gerardi to show up on the bridge looking like Gerardi so that Picard would trust her instantaneously instead of having to do the weird song playing stuff. Another one of those like, oh, we're gonna keep it hidden from the audience that makes no sense in retrospect. But then it turns out that the Borg are here because they detected this big transwarp conduit gonna be made in the center of the galaxy and needed to use Starfleet ships in order to stop it from wiping out all life in the galaxy again. Some galactic threat nonsense mumbo jumbo that every season of Star Trek needs to end with the galaxy possibly ending. Was very bored by that. When it also kind of weirded me out that it's like the Borg couldn't have done this themselves. They needed the Federation ships to do it. I can make the argument that like she wanted to use the Federation ships because it was in Federation space, but I feel like the Borg would have just showed up with a Borg cube and just done whatever the hell nonsense they wanted to do instead of anything else. But again, you can maybe make the argument that Gerardi, being Gerardi Queen now, would have wanted to use the Federation ships. It's a little bit wonky, and I wasn't a big fan of it. I just think the Borg would have done what the Borg do, but whatever, we'll live with it. But they managed to stop this conduit being created from killing a lot of other people, but it does lead to this weird threat of, ooh, who made this transwarp conduit? Probably the big alien threat that we're going to get in Season 3 of Picard. And from there, Gerardi asks for provisional entry into the Federation so that they can guard this transwarp conduit. Again, feels weird to me. Maybe, again, this is just the influence of the Gerardi Borg Queen, but I'm also sort of sitting here like, why would they ask permission? Why would the Borg also want to sit here guarding this transwarp conduit? I know that they probably want to study it and all that stuff. It's just one of those like weird like, oh, we're just going to kind of wrap this up neatly, don't ask any questions. It's not bad, but I just have a lot more questions than the show gives me, and it reads just the show wanting to wrap everything up nicely and cleanly than actually like thinking about the questions that I have. But then this gets us to the last two scenes of the episode that, again, I liked a lot in their execution, which was Picard going back and meeting with Whoopi Goldberg's version of Guinan and just sort of reflecting on the season's events as a whole. She knew Rios, and we get the confirmation that he lived out his life happily and died trying to defend some medical supplies, which fits for Rios. And that also Teresa's kid, Ricardo, was also the one that worked with Renee in order to save the oceans and things of planet Earth, leading to what we eventually see on Earth today. And that kind of also weirdly matches up with Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, because whales went extinct before Ricardo and Renee were able to fix everything. That like kind of makes sense in my head. I actually kind of like that. I believe we also get the First Contact theme in here. It's one of the Star Trek The Next Generation musical cues comes up here. I think it was First Contact, but I wasn't 100% sure. But it was nice to hear it. And we get small little moments between Rios, Seven, and Raffi. Also, I like that Seven and Raffi kissed and sort of reconciled earlier. That was also really nice. So, sweet scene all around. And then we get one final scene with Picard going to Laris and sort of talking to her and saying, hey, I kind of want to be in a relationship with you now. Kind of reflecting on all the stuff that we had learned through trauma and coming to accept yourself and being able to accept yourself in order to find love for others in a nice, really lovely way. Sort of reflecting what Q said to Picard earlier on in the episode. So all of that was really sweet. So this brings me to the end of my review. And like I said, I have a lot of frustrations that I articulated to a lot of you. A lot of the way the plot wrapped up felt quick and neat and tidy. And I'm left with a lot of questions and sort of the macro events that hopefully will get discussed more in Season 3, mostly around the Borg and the weird transwarp conduit that gets made. But that being said, I still find a lot of the stuff rushed and sloppy in a lot of cases. But the moments that shine in this episode, like the stuff between Picard and Q, or Guinan and Picard, or Picard and Laris, or Seven and Raffi, all those moments, those little gems, I think were actually really beautiful. Like I kind of said before, I don't think they ever come to more than the sum of their parts. I think they are nice little individual moments, like Data's death in Season 1, but I still really like them. And I will accept this season and this episode for what it is. Not my favorite season of Star Trek ever, but I still find things that I loved about it. But with that all being said, this review has gone on a little bit too long, so thank you so much for watching this. Don't forget to check out my Star Trek Strange New Worlds premiere review, which should be up right now as well. But beyond all of that, thank you so much, my friends, and live long and prosper.